What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video. And in this video, I'm just going to take a brief step back from Demise format, which is the format that I'm currently covering on the channel, and talk about a format that I sort of skipped over when I initially covered it back when I was covering like Warrior format and then going into GOAT. There is kind of a hypothetical format that you can play in between Warrior format and GOAT format using the Warrior format ban list from October 2004, but adding in some promotional cards like Mind Control and also the cards from Flaming Eternity. And normally, like for these hypotheticals around this time period, I just sort of skipped over them because, like, for instance, the card pool of a format with Soul of the Duelist versus Rising Destiny, like, doesn't really make much of a difference because not too many powerful cards are coming out at that time. And then shifting into the GX era, you have more official events that you do base formats around. And so we sort of move away from the hypothetical formats or unlimited formats that we covered in the DM era. But, since we've got a locals coming up for this format, because locals can be a bit more complete in the coverage of these formats, I figured I'd make a video on this format because Flaming Eternity format, there is potentially something you can do here. And the only reason really why I'm, actually even featuring Flaming Eternity format as a locals format was because there is a sort of interesting interaction that you don't get in any other format in the game's history. And that interaction is Good Goblin Housekeeping at 3 copies, plus Makyura the Destructor at 3 copies. Now, this may seem like a pretty trivial interaction, but it is kind of interesting to play around with because if you manage to get Makyura the Destructor in Graveyard, you now have 3 more ways to dig even deeper in your deck. And if you can sort of just like put these Good Goblin Housekeepings together, like over the course of, drawing through your deck, and draw into a bunch of them, Good Goblin Housekeeping can basically be draw 3 cards and then select one, put it on the bottom of your deck, and that just seemed pretty busted. So I thought about what decks could best like house this combo. I thought about like Library FTK, I thought about Scientist FTK, because both of those, they use things like Monster Gate, so if you play Rhoda with Makyura and then you Monster Gate it away, you can potentially get into things. But I ultimately decided to shift away from that, because I feel like a lot of those decks, their engine outside of Makyura don't really support the traps as much. And, like for instance, if you're playing Library FTK, you kind of want everything you're doing to be a spell once Library is on field. And if you're drawing with like Good Goblin Housekeeping or Charge Read or things like that, that's still good, but you're not getting counters on the Library. And that ultimately hampers your OTK at the end of the day. And besides FTK, I feel like the Makyura Good Goblin Housekeeping stuff doesn't really matter as much because once you're activating a Monster Gate, like it's sort of like you're committed to your plan, right? That's what you want to be doing. And, drawing deeper in the deck doesn't really help, get more things on field that often. So I don't really think it's that good in that deck either. So ultimately the deck that I decided to put this in was the Empty Jar deck that I came up with when covering Warrior format the first time on the channel. So if you want to watch that, you can check the upper right corner of this video. It should be there. But that deck is basically, using Makyura the Destructor, and the deck does have a variety of ways to put it in grave with things like Morphing Jar as well as Drag Down into the Grave, but it's using Makyura the Destructor to basically give you more copies of Book of Taiyu to flip up your flip monsters, and Desert Sunlight fulfills that role. So I liked it in Warrior format. I didn't really think it was like the best deck around because, it is sort of just a bricky combo FTK deck, and those sorts of decks are not generally the best in a given format. But this deck I felt like was uniquely suited to use the Makyura. And speaking of Makyura, like in getting engraved, you can get it in the ways that we did previously with like Morphing Jar, Drag Down, and things like that. But Flaming Eternity also had another new tool that you can use to get Makyura engraved, and that is Feather the Phoenix. And Feather the Phoenix also has the added benefit of stacking a card on top of your deck. So if you've got a powerful spell that you want to draw into again, because you're drawing into a ton of stuff, you can easily do that. You can also stack even one of your draw traps or things like that. So Feather the Phoenix is pretty good in this deck as well, and so we are playing 3 copies of it. And I sort of just cooked up this deck. It's definitely, there's more you can do to optimize it. It is 41 cards. 41 versus 40 doesn't change the consistency too much, but I will say that if you do want to take this deck and run with it, I do think that a deck like this really does want to be at 40 cards, because yes, the consistency doesn't change too much, but this is a deck where like you want to have your combo online as much as possible, right? You don't want to have the potential chance of drawing like, 5 traps in your opener and no way to get Makyura engraved. So I do think that a deck like this, you really do want to be at 40 cards. Yes, mathematics don't change that much over the course of it, but like this deck works differently than other decks that you can generally be fine like putting a 41st extra good card in it. So going through the card by card real quick. let's just talk about the main engine of the deck. So this is Empty Jar. So the main engine of the deck is your Cyber Jars and your Morphing Jars. You're trying to loop these over and over with things like Book of Moon, Book of Taiyu, and the Shallow Grave, and also Desert Sunlight if you get Makyura Grave. And you're basically using these to have your opponent draw a ton of cards deeper into their deck. And then the ultimate goal of the deck is to use card destruction plus Serial Spell to cause them to deck out, because card destruction discards their hand, and Serial Spell basically gets them to do it again and draw a ton of cards. So that is our main engine. The ways in which we accomplish it, not complicate it, is to get Makyura Grave, get your draw spells online. Also just use regular draw spells like Upstart Goblin, Pot of Greed. Use things like Spell Reproduction to recycle your spells and draw more. We've got Drag Down to the Grave in this version of the deck because this is a way to get Makyura Grave. It can be a bit awkward because Makyura needs you to activate traps from hand, but we are playing Triple True Nade both to bounce back our opponent's back row in case we do have to go second, and also just to, sort of be able to get these traps back in hand if we do have to set it to send a Makyura. So some other good cards to know about. Painful Choice is still legal in this format, so it's in the deck. I mean, this is a great way to send Makyura to Grave. We got Double Rota to search out Makyura. We got Pot of Greed, of course, because we want to draw deeper in our deck. We got Reloads in case we draw into a hand that doesn't really do anything. I do think that while Reload is a -1, it is still necessary in a deck like this because you are going to wind up with hands that don't do anything without the Reload to actually reset it. We got Serial Spell, as I mentioned. We got triple spell reproduction, that is, because this is very, very good at getting back a spell that you need to pull off your combo. And because you're drawing a ton of cards off Morphing Jar or Cyber Jar, the discard cost doesn't really matter all too much. We got triple Shallow Grave. Now, as a key point to note about this card, you do need your opponent to have a monster in graveyard to actually use this card. But we've got multiple ways to do that with like Drag Down, as well as like card destruction if we do have to burn that early, or if we get off a Morphing Jar or Cyber Jar activation. That is a good way to also get monsters in Grave. We got an Upstart Goblin draw deeper in our deck. We got triple Desert Sunlight, as I mentioned, triple Good Goblin Housekeeping to really dig deep into our deck, and also a Reckless Greed, which is basically a Pot of Greed if you get Makyura off. Side deck is kind of sort of a hodgepodge. Tomatoes are very good at just sort of, if you don't think you can pull off the FTK, you can bring these in and potentially, have your opponent crash into them and then bring out a Cyber Jar and then get off to the races that way. These were in the original Warrior format version of the deck. I decided to cut them because I really wanted to fit in the Good Goblin and Feather the Phoenix package here. But they are still good if you want to shift away from that and go back to a more traditional version of the strategy. Triple Thunder Dragon here to deck thin a bit. You can also use this to draw more off card destruction. I'm not the biggest fan of this, but it is something that you can play if you want to. We got Change of Heart in case we are going second, I guess. We can potentially pull stuff off with that. But realistically, the rest of this side deck is kind of iffy, honestly. You can definitely optimize it a bit more because, for the video, I'm just going to basically play this deck exactly as is. Maybe I'll include a Heavy Storm or like an MST or Dust Tornadoes or things like that if I know that I'm going first and stuff and can set up Spell and Trap. Or no, if I know that I'm going second and need to clear my opponent's stuff away. Triple Solemn if I know I'm going first, and potentially even triple Dutch Tornado if I know I'm going first. But generally, this deck just wants to FTK as quickly as possible, and so you won't really be going into the side deck all too much, except for like the heavy thing, as I mentioned. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. Let's dive into some games and actually see how this deck performs. Okay, we got a game against Dumpshark, a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We're diving into the games, and this is the only match that I got because, frankly, this deck is very tiring to play, and I don't necessarily relish, like, basically FTKing people, but some people do enjoy that, so I want to feature it on the channel. And this is a pretty good hand. We got Upstart and Pop. We got Cyber Jar to do Book of Taiyu shenanigans. So we're feeling very good about this. We also have Desert Sunlight, so if we do manage to send Makyura to Grave, we're feeling good about that too. We're going to go for an Upstart, then go for a Pot. And it's a bit tricky. There are some things we can do. We could potentially go with Feather, pitch a card, put Pot of Greed on top of the deck, then drag down to try and draw into it. We could also spell Repro to get back Pot, which also is not a bad idea. And we ultimately decide to go for the spell Repro to get back Pot. Since we're getting back Pot, I decide to... Oh, I should have probably kept drag down here. Oh, no, wait, no. Yeah, because we're just getting back Pot. So, yeah, I think that's fine, ultimately. And we've got Book to do shenanigans as well. But unfortunately, we don't draw a way to really get into other stuff. We can go for the drag down here, and I ultimately decided to do that just to sort of get a peek at their hand and basically use this like a confiscation. And I see that they've got a Rat, a Heavy Storm, a Rat, a Book of Moon, and a Sinastral. Well, normally you want to send a monster to get Shallow Grave online, but, we've got 3 back rows, so we want to send that Heavy Storm there. So we're going to do that. and then draw a card. Hopefully a Book of Tayu that can get us into this a bit more. Nope, just a Morphing Jar. Well, that gives us follow-up next turn, potentially, if we don't have another way to get Cyber Jar online. They're just going to step 4, pass back to us, and we draw a Feather of the Phoenix here, which can be pretty good. We're going to go for a Trunade to bounce everything back to hand. That way we can play uninterrupted here. And then we're going to flip up a Cyber Jar, pop in the board, banishing 5 each. And hopefully, you know, we can assemble the FTK on this turn. It's not quite an FTK at this point, but it is still pretty good if we can dig deep enough to get into things. We do draw a Rhoda off that Cyber Jar, so now we can actually really get off to the races, because now we can Rhoda out a Makyura and then Feather the Phoenix to pitch it and put something on top of our deck, use good Goblin housekeeping, etc. So we're feeling very good about this here right now. Opponent's going to set 3, we search out the Makyura there, and then we're going to pitch it to the Feather, and then we're going to stack that Pot of Greed because Pot of Greed is just so good. We're going to go for a good Goblin housekeeping here, and then we're going to put a card on the bottom of our deck. Doesn't really matter at this point because we're just, I mean, we're in a really good spot. We're going to go for the Shallow Grave on that Cyber Jar, give them their Cyber Jar, but it won't matter because we get Desert Sunlight here to flip up that Cyber Jar, pop everything on board, banish 5. We drew even more Desert Sunlight, so we've got more ways to get into things here. And we haven't even normal summoned, so we can go for a Morphing Jar play here as well if we want to. But it's just getting a bit crazy here, honestly. We're feeling pretty good about this. Opponent has a lot of cards in hand. If we draw into Serial Spell, we just win the game off that card destruction, basically. So, yeah, I mean, we could potentially just set the card destruction and then go for a reload here to shuffle back our hand and try and draw into Serial Spell that way. And that is ultimately what I decided to do, because I'm like, let's see what happens here. If we draw into Serial Spell, we do win, so I'm feeling good about that. If we draw into, like, you know, Shallow Grave or something, we're feeling fine about that too. And we do draw into Shallow Grave, so we can just go for Shallow Grave there for that Cyber Jar, and then we will flip it up with the Desert Sunlight that we just drew, pop on the board, revealing 5, and we do indeed draw that Serial Spell, so that's just going to be the end of the game there. So, I mean, that's how it goes sometimes with this deck. If you give it an inch, it takes a mile. And even if my opponent had, like, attacked into the Cyber Jar last turn, like, I'm not really sure if it would have made too much of a difference here. But yeah, I mean, this is just going to be the end of the game here for sure. But yeah, I mean, my opponent will get some cards set, but, you know, it won't quite matter because their hand is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 cards deep. We got card destruction plus Serial Spell, so they're drawing 26 cards total, and their deck only has 18. So that's going to be the end of game 1. We're going into game 2. Again, I don't really change much. I was debating bringing in the heavy for something because, you know, it could be good here. But, like, they're on Panda Burn, it seems like, which, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that deck really plays Solemns in the side deck even. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like we're feeling fine about this. Although, maybe they had Solemns. I don't know. I forget. I wasn't really paying attention to their stuff because I was just focused on mine. That's something that if you become more experienced with the FTK decks, like, you start to focus on their stuff more. But here I was really just trying to chain together things to actually lead to a good outcome here. But I don't have a Trunade or something, so I'm just going to set a Book of Tayu, go for reload. They could have, like, MST or something to punish this because they hit our, like, best card here. But I feel like, you know, if they get MST, they get MST. MST is limited, so I don't really care that much about it. And I feel like it should just be fine here, going for the reload and hoping that we draw into a flip monster. Unfortunately, we do not. And we're just going to go for another reload because we're trying to draw into, like, a Cyber Jar or something. And that's kind of rough. We go for a card destruction here, pitching a good Goblin housekeeping and a Book of Tayu, but we draw into the Cyber Jar. So we are rewarded for our efforts here. So we are going to set that Cyber Jar, flip it up with the Tayu, and then, you know, get cracking here. We're feeling pretty good about this. They do have a Fiber Jar, so we really do need to kill them this turn, because if we don't, then they're going to get that Fiber Jar online and potentially reset the game state, which is not good for us, especially since we're a bit down on life points there. But we do draw a Pot off the Cyber Jar. We draw Painful Choice as well. So we're feeling very good here. We've got ways to turn on Makyura with Drag Down. So we're feeling, I mean, we're feeling like $1 million with this hand. We're going to go for that Painful, send Makyura, double Rhoda, and then we're going to send a Morphing Jar and Trunade. I think Trunade we probably could have kept in deck, but I do really feel good about these first 4 that we send. We've used up our normal summon, so no point to having Morphing Jar in the deck as another just brick monster to draw. If they choose to not give us Makyura, then it's Engrave. If they choose to give us Makyura, you know, then we're not drawing into these dead rotors at least. So either way, like we got no warriors left in deck, so we can just get these out of here. Even if they give us a rota, you know, we should be fine because then our reckless is turned on, etc. So I think the last card maybe shouldn't have been Trinade, maybe it should have been like Book of Moon or something. But I think it's ultimately fine here to send this. We could have also sent another Good Goblin Housekeeping, but with one already in graveyard, I feel like drawing into another is like really good if we can get that online. But anyways, we're gonna be given the Makyura, which makes sense. They don't want us to turn on our traps. And we draw into a pretty interesting hand here because we don't want to reload here because then our Makyura gets shuffled back in deck. We don't have a way to search it out. So I don't want to do that. So what I ultimately decided to do is go for a spell reproduction, pitching a drag down and a drag down, and getting back that Pot of Greed. I figure spell reproduction is important for later to get back the card destruction that we so sorely need to actually end the OTK. And yeah, we draw into a feather, so we are very lucky for that. But we do have a fair amount of feathers in the deck, a fair amount of ways to, you know, sort of pitch the Makyura. So it's not the most lucky thing in the world, but it is still very good for us. We go for Reckless Greed here, now that Makyura's engraved. We go for Pot of Greed as well. We go for Good Goblin Housekeeping. We could have even gone for a Feather of the Phoenix to pitch something and then put something on top of our deck to then go for Good Goblin. But I feel like this should just be fine. Going for Good Goblin, seeing what we get. And we're going to stack that Trinade on bottom because we don't really need it anymore. We're going to think about exactly what to do here. We could just Spell Repro, and we will indeed Spell Repro here. And we're going to do that to get a Pot of Greed. We still have one more Spell Repro in deck that we kind of need to pull off our, you know, card destruction stuff. But I figure we'll be able to draw into that if we draw deeper into our deck and can get into our other shallow graves and things like that, because we have not used up any shallow graves so far, and we do have a Desert Sunlight in hand. So I figured this is a risk worth taking, and I'm just going to go for it. We do draw into a shallow grave and another spell reproduction, so we're just that good. We are going to bring back that Cyberjar there, flip it up with a Desert Sunlight, pop the board, and there's this hero spell. So actually, this should probably be the end of the game here. You know, because we can just spell repro, get back the card destruction, and then go for a hero spell to do more stuff. But we have the third Good Goblin Housekeeping as well. So, you know, we can do that and get some crazy stuff going on here because that's 1 and that's 2. So we can actually draw 3 and put 1 on bottom. But I ultimately decided just to put my opponent out of their misery because, you know, this is the end of the game. So, I mean, I could have done it for the content, but I just feel like it's wasting time at that point. So, yeah, we're going to go for Spell Repro, pitching 2, and grabbing that card destruction, and then we're going to card destruction plus hero spell, and that's just going to be the end of the game. So, yeah, I mean, this deck is, you know, pretty crazy if it goes off, but that is a big if, in my opinion. I don't really think this is the most consistent thing in the world. Like, you can do test stands with it. Actually, let's just do some test stands now with it and see how it does. But I don't really think it's, like, the most consistent thing. I mean, you saw from game 1 here that it didn't even manage to pull off the FTK there. We just got by with our opponent, like, giving us another turn to draw into more stuff. Time for everyone's favorite part of the sort of videos and test stands. I'm not going to do too many of them because feedback I've gotten in the past shows that, like, people don't necessarily like the test stands as much as actual games. But this is sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing to show how breaky the deck can be. I mean, this is about as breaky as you can get. I'm just going to go a little bit further because, like, you know, we do have the way to go further. We can get back upstart and then draw a card here. But, yeah, it's not going to do it. So, as you can see, the deck is very much not perfect. You will just draw hands that are literally unplayable. This is actually a very good hand because we drew into Cyberjar plus Tayu. So, this will probably be, like, the end of the game here. Not Bananish, Banish 5. And I have to do the slash. So this, I mean, this is about as good as it gets. I don't even think I need to show more here because we have the Sheer Spell in hand as well. They're getting potentially 5. We have Shallow Grave, which we can't necessarily do right now. We need like a drag down to do that really, but we can go for a Rhoda here, search out the Makyura, and then, I mean, this is really, really over. Like this is pretty much the end of the game. The one thing that I can debate here, like, we do have drag down, so we can do something there. But, do I go for that? I mean, so if I drag down, I'm just going to go for Pot of Greed, I think. Draw 2. Morphing Jar is pretty, well, Morphing Jar isn't actually that good. Because we can't really use it that well. We're going to go for an upstart here. Draw 1. Painful Choice is pretty decent here, all things considered. Because we can, like, deck them a bit. Yeah, so let's Painful Choice. I mean, we send card destruction here, and we're feeling pretty good. So let's send a card destruction to Grave. And then the others, I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Like, we're probably going to set some for Trinade. Because we haven't won if They've drawn 2 like 10 cards in hand max. So if we serious spell card destruction, it doesn't quite do it here. So we need to get a bit creative with what else we send. So we're going to send the other Rhoda there. I think we send probably, it's tough. Probably a reload. We'll just send a bunch of reloads. I don't think we need the reloads anymore. So yeah, that's 5 there. They're going to give us probably not card destruction, probably like the Rhoda, because that does the least here. But we've got a spell repro. So we will spell repro. And we will send a book, which honestly, book is probably not really needed here in the deck. I could probably cut the books because realistically, the books were in there because we had like pre-mats and calls and stuff. But I cut the pre-mats and calls from this version of the deck. So like, honestly, we probably don't need it. But yeah, I'm going to do that. And then I think what we do is we want to draw into Trunade. So... Yeah, this is tricky. I think what I do, I could activate Drag Down now. Thing is, I'm not going to have any cards in hand after this. So I'm going to set Shallow Grave. No, actually, no, I messed up here because now we can't actually get the lethal line. Because, you know, it's very tricky here. I think we actually have to hard card D, which is always brutal, but like, it is sometimes what you have to do. I'm going to lose the Drag Down as well. So do we have any other spell repros? We don't right now, but this is what we have to do. Unless we want to like drag down Zero Spell, but that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, we're going to lose it all here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I probably should have spell reproed for like a pot or something, but oh well, doesn't really matter that much. Now the downside to this is if they have like somehow not pitched a monster grave, then our Shallow Grave shut off. But luckily we've got Shallow Grave to bring back the Cyberjar in defense there. And then we can flip it up with a Taiyu there, pop that, banish 5. My opponent's drawing more cards as well. And I mean, we can just sort of get down to, you know, killing them here. So, 2 hand, 2 hand, 2 hand. Our good Goblin Housekeeping is online here, as well as our Desert Sunlight if we wanted to do that. Let's say we want a Shallow Grave again, and then we can. I mean, you see how we get there from there. There are 2 spell repros left in deck, so we're gonna draw into them at some point because we're gonna get basically double double Cyberjar off the Shallow Graves and the Taiyu, and also we can Trinade back the Sunlight, and so yeah. So that is a W for us, but it does show how difficult the deck can be to pilot for sure. But yeah, I mean, this test hand is helpful. It's teaching me to cut the Book of Moons here in this version of the deck, because the previous version used Book of Moons for like pre-mats and stuff, but like here it doesn't really matter that much. The one thing where it would matter is if you're like looping Morphing Jar itself and not Cyberjar. But realistically, you always want to be doing with Cyberjar, not Morphing Jar. But this is a very good hand. Is it a very good hand? Actually, it might be a reloadable hand. But anyways, we're going to go for Painful here, because I do want to get some things in. Oh, what do I do with this? It's a tough choice. Let me know what y'all want me to Painful here. I'm going to cut the video off there. I don't think people enjoy the test hands as much. But let me know what you think I should send off this Painful with this hand here. We'll consider it a sort of dual puzzle. A dual puzzle that doesn't necessarily have a correct answer or not. But it is a dual puzzle like, what would you do in this situation? Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to discussing with y'all as always. If you're interested in FET format, trust me, it's not just this deck. This deck is probably not even tier 1. Probably like tier 2 or Rogue. So, like, if you want to play a format that's very much like Warrior format, just with some added things to the card pool, definitely head on over to the YGF from Zero Discord server and play there. That's also where you can play any format that I featured on the channel. But, yeah, it's going to do it for this video. Like, comment, subscribe to all the YouTube stuff if you want to help us grow even more. It really helps out a small channel like me. And also big shout outs to my patrons, Rinchwin, Porkchop Coon, Brett Knocker, Tyler Compton, GeoMyFest, and Dump Truck, along with Scout Zero. It means a lot that y'all support me this way and encourage me to make more videos like this in the future. But that's going to do it for this video. I hope that you all enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGF from Zero, and I'm signing off.